Several members of our community have been working on 911 consolidation for a number of years, and a number of individual towns have consolidated over the last several years. What makes this project a little bit different is an effort to say, what if we looked at consolidation as a much larger group? Would we come up with a different result if we collaborated and worked together and started to strategize with one another about what a consolidated center might look like? Up here, you've heard me talk about this before, so I won't go into it in great detail, but for our listening public, this really shows you that Lake County has a rather complex 911 public safety answering system. So we have 30 fire agencies, 41 individual police agencies, 18 911 communication centers, 52 municipalities, and 21 emergency telephone system boards. Each one of those entities has a role to play in public safety and in public safety call taking. And so our initiative that I'm going to talk about today is to collaborate with these folks and working together on coming up with a better solution for 911 call taking here in Lake County. So Lake County has had a number of studies, and I won't go into those because we presented those previously, but what it has arrived at is a series of meetings with our local government partners. That includes the entities that I just showed you on the screen to say, what would it take if we wanted to look at this? And so what we have developed is the first center consolidation concept. In other words, let's work together on the first center. And that means bringing the partners who are interested in consolidating or at least considering consolidation today. Now, it's important to note that each individual local jurisdiction has their own decision-making authority, and they may have recently bought technology or have other reasons why they don't feel they're prepared to consolidate today. So this is really for people who are in a position to consider it and who want to work together. So essentially, we want to offer the greatest opportunity for the following goals. Here in Lake County, because of our complex network, we have call transfers for 911 call taking. That means if your call ends up at the wrong center, because there are many and all of our cell phones hop from tower to tower, your call, when you call 911, can end up at the wrong center. That center then does not have the technology to dispatch the unit that needs to go to wherever you are to provide you with that service. That includes both police and fire, although it is a little more common with fire simply because they have districts, so they cross multiple villages. So what happens then is the call taker stays on the phone, but they have to get a call taker from the other center to also get on the phone. So then the questions that an individual citizen has already answered the 911 call, the first 911 call taker, they must answer them again for the second call taker. The purpose of that is really quality control. We don't want to lose information. We don't want to not have the right information at the receiving center. But what happens when you do that, while it's very important, is it's time, right? So if you are in a crisis situation and that call transfer takes 20 or 30 seconds, that's 20 or 30 seconds. And then from that point, the new dispatcher has to get the additional information and then has to perform the dispatching function. So the delay in that call transfer can be very significant in certain medical situations. So our primary and eminent goal here is service provision to our public. There is a better way to provide this service. Other places across the country have solved for this, and we want to solve for it here in Lake County. We also want to gain next generation technology functionality. What does that mean? So 10 or 15 years ago, we didn't have very many cell phone calls, right? So as an industry, we had to change what we do to accept cell phone calls and to figure out what to do when the call ends up at a tower other than what it ought to. Or if you're driving down a highway, your call will hop from tower to tower. So there was technological changes that had to occur. That same thing is happening again now because people really want to text 911. They want to send videos to 911. All of those new technologies require the 911 industry to buy new technology, to train on that new technology, and to perform the service differently than they do today. And so that next-gen technology is something that all of our 911 centers are going to be working on over the next 5 and 10 years, and we expect it to change in that 5 to 10 year period as more and more technology mediums are available to our public. That is a significant cost, and one of the opportunities here is to share in that cost and to work on that transition together. Staffing structures support time off, training, and shift relief. If you happen to know any 911 call takers, it's an industry as a whole that has significant turnover. It's a stressful job, and it has a pretty significant training module to get through before you can be fully operational as an independent 911 call taker. So for the sheriff's office or any of our other 911 centers, they invest a lot of time in that training, a lot of time one-on-one with those staff members, but it is a difficult job and it is high stress and it's not for everyone. So oftentimes there is a fair bit of turnover. One of the things that working together can provide is what's called a better shift relief factor, which means if someone has left their agency or if you're short-staffed because someone needs vacations or has a death in the family, it means nobody else can take time off because you don't have a sufficient shift relief factor. It is one of the most challenging things to accomplish in a small center. When you're in a larger center, you can spread that shift release across more people. So if one person's gone, it doesn't hinder the operation to this same extent as if you're in a small center with only 5 call takers. If you have only 5 call takers on a shift and one of them's not there, the other 4 are picking up an additional 20% or more of work. It also impacts you during your peak periods. So if there is a holiday or something happens in your town, a tornado, a hailstorm, something that increases 911 calls, it also helps the center absorb those calls because you can't predict when your peaks will be in most cases. So then the same number of call takers has to take, and sometimes a spike of 100% if there's an event, a weather event or other element, like the flood even. They call because the streets are closed, your cars get stuck in the road, and so on. So that staffing structure is important. The last piece is a sustainable funding model that increases the efficiency and reduces the cost. If you look across the country, many organizations and communities have consolidated before us. And while our service provision is the primary reason why we want to do 911 consolidation, addressing the cost increases of both staffing and technology and training is also an important factor. So who is interested in considering consolidation now? I urge you not to look at this list and say, why isn't town 1, 2, 3 on here? Because in some cases, they are represented by an ETSB board or what's called a JETSB board, which is a joint emergency telephone system board. So the fact that you don't or may not see your town's name up here may simply be that they are joining or participating through their emergency telephone system board. If you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk with you offline about who's represented. At this point, we have received resolutions from the governing body saying we are interested in committing to participate with Lake County and the other local government partners on 911 consolidation and implementation plan. We'll talk about what an implementation plan is in one moment. The ones on the bottom are folks that I've talked to more recently. They're under awaiting resolutions. Their boards have not passed that yet, but they have expressed an interest. I've presented a presentation, and they are taking it to their board or council for consideration upcoming. I had 2 additional meetings on Friday that I could add to that list, but they haven't talked to their governing boards yet, so we may have 2 additional partners. So what is the path to consolidation? We have these participating member agencies, and I'll talk a little bit about what a member agency is in a minute. And what we are going to do is set up a governance structure with committees with the task of doing option thinking and solution building. There are many hurdles and barriers to 911 consolidation, but they are solvable. And so we have to come together as a group of communities with any individual problem and say, how do we solve that problem? What are our options? What are the pros and cons of those options? And which options are best for a consolidated center? The other thing this group will need is a project manager. That is the purpose for each community's contribution to this project, is to hire a project manager who has expertise in this area and who can guide and facilitate the conversations of the local governments to bring this to fruition. Also, we need to fully identify and outline the next steps, decision points, define a process, and set timelines. Then we want to develop a migration and implementation plan. The goal by the end of this is to provide sufficient information to our local government partners and our public safety agencies to say, here's what consolidation can look like here in Lake County. Here are the impacts of it, the positive and those that people might be fearful of, and consider it with all the information they need to make a decision. So the implementation plan, what is a member essentially, and what are they going to be working on? We requested active participation and commitment. It does take people at the table with expertise in both fire, police, and 911 call taking to talk through these issues. So we've asked each community to assign, appoint staff members who have that expertise to a variety of committees to work on that. We also asked for a pay share for the implementation plan, as I mentioned, to hire the expertise necessary and the project manager. We need to have timely, clean data. I cannot emphasize this enough. Many of our 911 centers do absolutely fabulous work, but the sheriff might do it a little different than Town 1, then Town 2, and then Town 3. If we want to bring our agencies together, we're going to have a consistent way of reviewing our data and organizing that so that we can compare apples to apples and we're counting the same things. And we have to do solution building. So that first group that we're going to set up is going to have a policy level committee that will be elected officials and city managers. They'll meet on a less regular basis, maybe quarterly. The purpose of that group will be really at the highest point of policy making to make sure that the police chiefs, fire chief, police and fire personnel, 911 call takers can advise them about the various options they consider. And so below that, you'll see an operations board or committee, and it will bring strategies and solutions and options to the different challenges that Consolidation presents to this policy group, which will ultimately develop a recommendation for the first consolidated center. Underneath of that, frequently there is a law enforcement operations advisory committee to deal with law enforcement specific details like detention and other items, as well as a fire and EMS operations group that deals with things like fire alarm boards and other things like that that are specific to fire. This is just a depiction of the proposed governance structure. The decision-making will be made by that governing or policy board, and so they certainly can change this as they move forward, but this was recommended in the previous study and was what we will begin the process with. You'll see off to the right-hand side and on the bottom is something I'm calling an advisory committee of future partners. One of the things we heard from our local units of government is that, I might not be ready to consolidate today, but it doesn't mean I'm not interested in consolidation, and I would like to still participate. So we strategized with how we could accomplish that, and what we're proposing is setting up an advisory committee of future partners. People that may not be ready to participate in consolidation today, but they are interested in looking at this as an option in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years because something might change or they need new technology. So we'll convene that group, and their goal will be to kind of keep their eye on the ball as it relates to the future partners' opportunity to participate. They will issue white papers or positions to the governing board and the operations board to say, please consider these items when you're making this decision because they will impact the future partners. So the goal here is really inclusion, and everyone has an opportunity to participate, whether they are ready to consolidate today or in the future. Next steps. Organizing meeting for participating public safety agencies. We set our first organizing meeting is tomorrow morning at 8:30 at the Central Permit Facility. All of our meetings will be open to the public and people are welcome to attend. The purpose of that is to share the information I'm sharing with you today, but in a much more detailed fashion with our partners and anyone else who chooses to participate or attend. We'll also then be developing, with the assistance of the state's attorney, intergovernmental agreements that will say how we are going to act as a body to make sure that we are appropriately and handling public funds and making sure we're using those in a way that is consistent and compliant with all laws and regulations. We'll consider options to secure that project manager, so this will just be an introduction to the concept of the project manager as well as a couple different methods to hire that person. And then we'll begin discussions about the operations committee and the work to do, and then hand that off to the project manager to facilitate once they're in place. Then we'll also need to do visitation of consolidated centers elsewhere to make sure that we learn from the people that have gone before us. And finally, we'll be standing up in the next month or so the Advisory Council of Future Partners. That is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.